A lot of what we were doing were festivals that were extremely logistically challenging. And so just figuring out how to get a large team to British Columbia to run operations for a festival nowhere near an airport on a one-lane road.
What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Role Model Podcast. I am your host, Derek Peterson, and today I'm talking to a good friend of mine, somebody I spent a bunch of time with in LA, Mr. Leo Nitzberg. He is a seasoned experience creator, impact consultant, and cultural instigator with 20 years of experience in live events and the event experience space. He's worked with a ton of iconic music festivals, including Coachella, helping shape operations, logistics, immersive experiences for massive audience. The scale of things that you do is incredible. Leo's background spans from promoting shows as a teenager to producing large-scale festivals and co-founding different companies that are focused on that experiential innovation. So welcome, Leo. Where does this podcast find you?
Thanks, Derek. It finds me in a really just happy place to be here with you because you're one of my favorite people on the planet. Globally, I'm currently in New Hampshire.
Nice. I think I did know that. So so give us a little bit of a rundown of what you're currently working on, and then we'll jump straight in.
Yeah, so we actually have two companies. My wife is my business partner. One of the companies is BWG that we started in 2014 that focuses more on music experiences, concerts, festivals, touring. And then we have a luxury experiential agency that we started about 2.5 years ago that we work with a lot of luxury brands and now kind of one of my favorite spaces to work in, which is high-end intimate conferences, B2B conferences primarily.
Dude, that's awesome. And we'll unpack some of that as we go and share some stories about the past. But this podcast specifically is interesting because I love talking about we're most of the people that I grew up around, and, everybody in my circle is, in their 40s and 50s. And all of us are kind of at this phase of life where things are starting to click a little bit more, like had some failed businesses, most of us, a few failed marriages, some other things. So like, if we could go back and talk to our younger self, there's some real insight that we would give that person. So if you could go back at any point in time to your younger self, what period of time would you meet your younger self and what advice would you give them?
I mean, honestly, I think there's so much that comes up for me here, and I'm gonna give you two because there's one kind of on the business side that I talked about recently. We do a lot of guest lecturing at UNH and used to do USC when we were in California. One is that when I think about 13, 14-year-old self trying to figure things out, family going through a divorce, it's going to be okay. Like, you're going to be okay. And and fast forward a few years from that, and this is something that I talk about often with students. We have an internship program with both of those schools that I mentioned, which has been amazing, is that start something. You mentioned that I started promoting shows really young, and a lot of that experience was kind of learning what not to do. But really the biggest thing that I can instill in these students, and there's a lot of incredible things. I mean, so much of where I am now today, I can attribute to a handful of people that I worked for that were mentors of mine all the way back to when I was promoting concerts when I was 15, 16, 18 years old in California and in LA. But that's really kind of the biggest thing, is just to start something and build something that you can own, and to find mentors maybe outside of the traditional kind of work space and ecosystem.
Yeah, dude, you've been an inspiration in this space for me forever. Like, even from the first time we met, I think that's what I adored about you. We met, I think at Tower, right? Was that when we first met at Tower Records? And
yeah, Empire Records.
Empire Records, which is basically what it was. Dude, you were always hustling, always like out promoting the bands that you were doing or whatever. And dude, from that moment, like from the time I met you until now, you had always wanted to work in the festival and the live experience. It's always been you kind of honed in early on what you really wanted to do, and you pursued it valiantly and then became wildly successful at doing it, which is um a testament to just who you are and your work ethic, which so kudos for that. But I wanted to
Thanks,
like
man.
go back a little bit to some of the divorce thing, because I think that's an important one. So how old were you when your parents got divorced? And then two, like, do you feel like you internalized some of that? And do you know, what were the byproducts of that? Like, was there decisions or things that you made because of that, that you look back on and like, were like, man, like this, my emotions got the best of me, and I was as a kid and I was kind of walking through this muddy, situation, and if I could go back and redo it, tell myself it will be okay, that sediment might have made some of these situations different.
Yeah. I was, I want to say 15. And I think a lot of it, to your point, was really internalized. I don't think that I had both. I have two very supportive and had supportive parents growing up. I'm still very close to both of my parents and very thankful for who they are individually and really letting me have so much freedom growing up to just really figure out who I was and what I wanted to do. And they were amazing for that. And I figured out probably, like you said, when I was probably 15 or 16, around that same time, maybe even earlier, that I wanted to be a concert promoter. I just, I fell in love with that idea, and Bill Graham being from Northern California. And I was just kind of obsessed with that culture and reading his biography and just finding mentors in Northern California, some of whom I'm still in touch with 30 years later. But
Yeah.
I don't think that I really had anyone to talk to about what was going on. And so I really felt lost. And I think not knowing how to manage those emotions or kind of what to do, a lot of it just became self-medicating. And so I
Yeah.
was taking a lot of drugs and drinking a lot. And I think in a lot of ways, you know, when I got through that, and it's not that I regret any of that, because I think through that time I learned a lot of lessons, but
Boy,
the
did we.
ability to, yeah.
Some of those stories from our LA days are, I still think back on them. I think at one moment you might have saved my life. There was a night that we were out heavy drinking, and we ended up in somewhere on close to the ocean in like Santa Monica or like Marina Del Rey somewhere, and we were walking up a flight of stairs that was pretty steep, and I was so drunk I think I started to fall backwards, and I
I
think
think
you grabbed.
yeah.
It was one of those moments where I don't remember anything, but I was immediately sober, because I'm like, if I had just fallen down these stairs, I might have died. So I was like, thank God Leo was like, nope, you're not falling. But so like your decisions to, so where were you at? Where were you living when you were 15, and what ultimately like got you, what took you to LA?
When I was 15, we were still living on the ranch where I grew up on, and it was in Northern California, about an hour north of San Francisco. My father had actually been raised on that property, so a lot of history there. Incredible place to grow up in so many ways. But it's something that I've talked to my dad about recently. He, I think, had a really tough time kind of figuring out that part of his life at the same time. It's hard to remember when we're kids that our parents are just people too. And so I think it was a big surprise to everyone. I mean, he left. He left one night, and I remember, I remember what that was like for everybody, and it took us a long time for him and I to rebuild our relationship after that. He's one of my best friends now, which is amazing. After that, and going back and forth between the two of them, he was living in another town about 25 minutes away, and my mom stayed pretty close to where we'd grown up after my parents sold that property. And I just, in between the drugs and alcohol, played a lot of music and really was just in love with promoting concerts. I think there's a venue in Northern California called the Phoenix Theater that maybe we talked about at some point, which I like to call lovingly kind of the most famous unknown venue in the world, because if you're from there, chances are you've probably heard of it. If you're in a band from that time period, you've probably played there. You've probably heard of it. You probably know who Tom Gaffey is. He's just an incredible person that like has taken all of these kids under his wing for decades at this point. And so at 14 years old, I had a key to the building, and we would go there and our bands would play on the stage. We'd rehearse. So I was promoting shows there. And as an incredible, as amazing as Tom is as a person, I'm sorry, Tom, he's probably not the best concert promoter on the planet. And so I did definitely get a bit of a crash course in some of the things not to do. And at the same time, he gave us a lot of freedom to figure that out.
Well, yeah, it probably was a benefit to him having you around too, because you were a young hustler and willing to go out and, push your band, get people in the door. I mean, that's how those venues make money, right? You got to have people in the door. So
yeah.
that's awesome. So at what point did you decide to leave Northern California and move to LA?
I actually was going to recording school in San Francisco, which is a whole separate story because one of the professors embezzled a bunch of money and it shut down overnight. And so I found myself, after I'd moved out at 17 into my own apartment in San Francisco, I found myself back at my mom's house. And I was again going to a lot of shows at the Phoenix, and I bumped into a really old friend of mine, a mutual friend of ours. And he had played drums. He was one of those kids that was, when he was 13 years old and we were all trying to figure out Green Day songs, he was like,
Yeah. He was shredding Green Day songs.
Shredding Green Day songs or playing Pantera and we
dude,
had lost touch
anybody
for a
at that
while.
age that could do like a Vinnie Paul riff, you're like, yeah, dude, you're in. You're sold.
Yeah. Yeah, sold. And so we had bumped into each other at a show, reconnected. He had gone to this program at the Berklee School of Music in Boston with a bunch of guys from a few guys from LA. He's like, yeah, we're starting a band. We're looking for a singer. I was like, oh, cool. I see.
So you met this drummer, connect with some guys from Berklee, and you guys, you guys collectively moved to LA?
So the other two guys were actually living in LA. They had grown up in Southern California and shared some of the music with me. And I remember he came out to my mom's house and I sang over the phone for the guys, and we kind of all just hit it off. And Dave and I took a trip down there. Honestly, right after my 18th birthday, looked for apartments and found someone who is still one of my best friends that was willing to rent to basically a couple teenagers at that point. And we moved down there.
Dude, so how long were you there before we ended up connecting? Because we connected, I think, when you started working at Tower Records, but you were already, you walked into Tower Records and, you were promoting your band from like day one. I was like, oh, nice. This guy operates like I do. So I was like, in job interviews, also passing out my demo CDs.
100%.
Yeah. So you're in LA. What does your trajectory look like in LA? What's the focus, and when did it start to shift?
So I was in LA, and I think Tower, I'm trying to remember if Tower was the first job that I had while I was down there, or if it was the marketing company that I worked at. I think it was Tower if I was still in the band.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah.
When I first met you at Tower, you were still in the band.
And so I had actually...
we went opposite directions. You left pretty quickly for a different job, and then I ended up getting a job at EMI Capital.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah. So one of my early mentors who was a manager, pretty iconic manager from the 80s and 90s, and then started promoting, and he was kind of semi-retired at the time that we connected when I was 15 years old, actually had an imprint under Tower Records. So I was working for his label in Northern California, which was in the back of a Tower Records in Greenbrae. And so he was the one that helped to put me in touch with the local store.
With
And
Sharon.
yeah,
I still follow her on Facebook, and I don't think she's on Instagram very often, but she's still out there doing her thing. I feel like she looks the
she's crushing
exact
it.
same still.
She looks great. She looks great. She's crushing. I mean, she's managing.
It's so cool to see. It's so cool to
actors,
see
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so cool to see people from like all of these walks of life, that these years that we were all kind of like doing similar stuff out there, like running successful businesses now. It's pretty rad. But
Love it.
yeah, so getting back to you. So like, okay, so your focus is on the band at the moment. Like when I met you, that was, you were promoting, but like your focus was still primarily like, hey, I want to get this band up and running. What was the biggest shift that kind of pulled you from like, hey, I'm going to pivot from doing the band stuff to I'm going to focus on I'm going to build something that like a live promotion. From the time we started talking, you were like, yeah, I want to run festivals.
So, I mean, that had been a dream of mine for a really long time, and honestly, I wanted to be a concert promoter before I wanted to sing in a band. And as much as I love performing and writing music, and it could be fear-based, it could also be kind of a reality for me of just not necessarily wanting to live the artist lifestyle. And so we broke up after a couple of years. I mean, it was amazing. It was like one of the best times of my life, being there, working at Tower Records, meeting you. And I felt like for a long time everyone showed up to play music and to write music and to play shows. But in terms of the business kind of behind the band, it was really all me. I was out 6 nights a week promoting. I was on Sunset going to multiple shows a night, like with my disc man, like, hey, you want to check out my band? Like handing out stickers, letting people listen outside at the Roxy at
Oh, I remember
11 o'clock at night. Yeah. Every
Dude,
night.
those were some of the nights that, you know, like I look back on with the fondest memories, because me and you ended up connecting on a lot of those nights. We'd end up going out together and checking out different shows and meeting different people. And I think I kind of knew. And it's funny because I had a similar experience when I was drumming, and I had a project with my buddy Aaron after the band that got signed and moved us to LA broke up, and then we started the Hollywood Mannequin Factory with my older brother, and that started to I kind of knew that wasn't going to go anywhere, but it was honestly being in LA and being around a bunch of real artists that made me realize, like, man, I'm not a real artist. Like, I don't actually enjoy playing that much. What I wanted to be was famous. Like if it comes down to it, I was like, man, I just want people to, from my own bullshit and childhood trauma, I wanted to become rich and famous so people looked up to me and admired me, which, when I finally got honest about that, I was like, yeah, every time I get on stage to play drums, I feel like I'm going to throw up 10 times and have an anxiety attack. So I'm like, maybe this isn't for me. And then I started to realize, like, oh, actually, I really enjoy the business side of it. So when I made the decision to stop playing in bands, it was like this just sense of relief, like the loading it gear at like, loading out at like 6 p.m. and then trying to load back into the studio at like 2 a.m., playing to like 5 people at some podunk bar off of like Melrose and like
Hesperia.
yeah, dude, all the ones that were like that you could, basically any bar that would book you that you didn't have to pay them, like we were all about. you know?
Yeah.
So so you transitioned, so band ends and now you're starting to like really focus. What was the first big kind of, uh, what was the first big break you felt like you got in like getting towards, the goal of doing what you're doing now?
I was working, and this was a few years after the fact. I had worked in marketing. I had kind of bounced around a little bit. My same friend, Aaron, who had vouched for us with his family to move into their apartment complex, was working in business management. And he was working at one of the larger independent business management firms. For anyone that's listening that doesn't know what business management is, particularly entertainment business management, we basically handled all the money for touring artists um, and celebrities. And so it
Yeah,
was,
it's like a hands-on CPA essentially. Like
yeah,
they take a fee, a percentage of the business, but they run it from front to back. So basically it's like having your own personal accountants that basically just run everything in real time. So uh you you don't end up in jail for evading taxes.
yeah,
Because most artists probably would if they it's so funny because when you meet real artists, you're like, yeah, there's a reason they're an artist, because they can't like think about other things in the way that other people do, like finances and things like that. It's just like it the conceptually, like they're like, no, this isn't my thing. And so that's when I started to realize for me, like, oh, there's a world where my skill set actually works really well here, because real artists don't want to deal with any of the stuff that I'm actually good at, like dealing with other people, dealing with money, dealing with negotiating. They don't want to do any of that. I'm like, I love that. And so like I can actually be an advocate for artists in this area, which was cool. It's kind of a cool thing to realize as I was going through it. I was like, oh, this is actually way better for my skill set than trying to be one of them, which I clearly wasn't. So,
Jason was a phenomenal.
dude, Jason, and he still is, and all of these, and he is exactly like that. Like so artist minded. Aaron, did you meet Aaron? Aaron is
Yeah,
like the artist of artists, and then you scale up from there. Like even the people I worked with, like Janet and Sierra, and like a lot of you start to realize like, oh, these are they're on a different, like their minds operate different, and so the
yeah,
skill set matches. There's a world where we have a job for a reason. So,
yeah. My
but
mother, who, bless her, is an amazing woman, is a painter and an artist, and she is all artist and one of the most creative, incredible people I've ever met. But she's all artist.
yeah.
She's all artist.
See, so yeah, you
Mhm.
probably got a little glimpse of like, yeah, I have hints of it in me, but it's not me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So your buddy Aaron
So
starts to connect you business management, and then what kind of transitioned you to, was working for Coachella? Was that your first big festival gig?
it was, and so what happened? I was working in business management. I was not very good at it. It was great just to get that experience to really understand the financial side. And the owner of the company was incredible. He was super supportive. I had been pretty open about my desire to want to be either in management or on the festival side. And so he was helping to make introductions for me, and he was very open about that. And there was kind of a tipping point. I was working on an account of one of my favorite artists who had been a huge artist growing up. It was an incredible experience to get to work directly with them. But I overdrew one of the accounts by like $25,000. And so, I
We
went into
we
my
all make
boss's
those
office, and
mistakes.
I was like, look, he goes, man, this, I think this just isn't for you, is it? And I was like, no, I don't think it is. But I was actually closing out another account, and it was an artist manager for kind of a smaller band that was no longer with the company. and it was Poison the Well.
Yeah.
And I look at the name, the contact name, and it says at Coachella. And I was like, huh. And so I asked him, I'm like, hey, who is this? And he gave me a little bit of background, and I said, do you mind if I email him? And so I sent a cold email and said it was one of the the producers of Coachella, and I just said, hey, I'm a massive fan of the festival. I had only been once at that point, and I would love to just sit down and have coffee and just learn about you and about what you do. And he responded super quickly, and we got together, and he remains one of my very close friends. I'd started just kind of working alongside him, and then was also at the same time. So that transitioned me out of business management. I wasn't full-time at Golden Voice at that point, but I was working on the festivals, and it really just pulled me into that world. And so I was working with a lot of the festivals across the country, and just working in every single department and learning as much as possible and traveling. And at a certain point, I did start working there full time, and really just
Yeah.
focusing on the festival division at Golden Voice.
So what? So give me an idea of what your career arc looked like beyond that, because after this is when it gets murky for me, because we started going our different directions. I worked in artist management for a number of years, and then when I realized I didn't want to be in LA anymore, we cut ties and run pretty quickly from LA. And so, you know, we obviously missed a bunch of our friends, but that also, I was so focused on having kids and being in Austin, Texas, and finding a new career and doing all of that, I missed a lot of what was going on with my friends. So your career at this point, from my perspective, I start to see it taking off, right? Like, you're growing in your roles at Coachella. Every year it feels like you're taking on more responsibility. Then it starts to morph into other things. Kind of walk me through what that kind of 10-year trajectory was like.
Yeah. So the first few years that I was at Golden Voice, in a lot of ways, I was kind of Bill's right hand. And so I got exposed to so much. I was in almost every meeting, and just able to kind of work and collaborate with all of the different department heads and the head of production. And so I was just learning as much as possible. And he, to this day, is one of the best leaders and managers that I have ever worked with, in terms of his ability to just be incredibly decisive, to really inspire, and to let everyone underneath him own their role and their job, and to do that their way, but with clear direction on kind of what the outcome needs to be. And so at that point, just getting that exposure, and again, just starting to really understand how festivals are run, there was a point, which was, I think, 5 years in, maybe 4 years in, I guess, in 2010, the festival sold out. And oftentimes it had sold out, but there were still tickets available at the door for people. But in 2010, there was nothing available. It was the first year that we had deployed RFID technology on a large scale in North America, and had really tried to kind of clamp down on people, scalpers, and all of that. And so thousands of people transcended on Indio that were expecting to be able to get in. It was an incredible lineup, and there was just equally as incredible traffic and people trying to sneak into the festival. And it just was a bit of a disaster for the festival and for the community and for the fans that did pay to get in. And so at that point, I kind of raised my hand and said, look, I let me fix this. There was really no one to focus on the exterior of the festival. And so I created a team and built up a team to really focus on that, and to fix those challenges, and to help the festival continue to grow and expand as they were expanding on the interior, so that the city and everyone else that was involved kind of outside of Golden Voice could all come together underneath a cohesive plan. So it was a lot of just, this is, we could probably spend a whole separate podcast on that. So I'm not going to bore everybody with the details, but
That's super interesting,
ultimately,
though.
yeah.
And I didn't realize that part of it. So you really, I mean, at this point, you're essentially playing politics at that point. You're going back and forth from, not like, are you meeting with like city officials and things like that?
I would say that had started earlier just because of the size of the festival. So I had already started to get used to running a lot of our offsite meetings, and those, you're working with every different agency under the sun. And so I was getting a lot of exposure to it at that point. But then definitely at this stage, I'm in weekly meetings with the Indio Police Department. I'm running community meetings with sometimes 20 people, sometimes 200 people from the surrounding community, literally going door to door to hundreds of houses to explain how we're changing things from 2010 to improve them for future years. So yeah, it was a lot of kind of being a politician and meeting people in the community for sure.
Wow, dude, but what amazing experience. Like, so you were getting your hands dirty in everything, I'm assuming, at that point. So ultimately, so then what was the next step after that?
I expressed my desire to do more within the company, and there was a lot of other festivals. While the festival division, in a lot of ways, so much of the focus was on Coachella and then Stagecoach, there was a lot of other kind of mid-sized to smaller festivals that were still in the ecosystem. We had created and launched Camp Flog Gnaw, which was still going, Tyler the Creators Festival. Mm-hmm. And then there was a festival called FYF. So I was involved with Flog Gnaw from its inception. And then a couple years after it had started, really took the role of festival director on Camp Flog Gnaw. And then at the same time, a festival called FYF, which we had at a smaller venue, and year over year it grew, and then we moved it to a larger venue. So it went from, a few thousand people to maybe 12,000 people to 15, to by the time that I had left, it was doing 55,000 people a day there at Exposition Park. And I think those 2 years really kind of instilled in me the desire to want to create something and want to do something more.
So then what came after that? Is this when you kind of started to
an accident,
an accident,
or serendipity, or whatever you want to call it. So my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, was on tour. I think she was touring with Blink-182 and Blink-182 or Slayer. I can't remember. And one of my colleagues at Golden Voice, Jen, who is a wonderful person, she approached me and said, "Hey, do you know anyone that want to do this?" Someone from, I think, CAA called her, and they were looking for a producer to do a TED Talk at a maximum security prison with Richard Branson.
That's
Yeah.
wildly specific.
Yeah. And Richard Branson had been a childhood hero of mine. And I was just, without even thinking about it, I just raised my hand. I said, me. and Meg and I, my partner, had talked about starting a company before this, but this really kind of forced our hand in some ways. And so in the spring of 2014, when she was on tour, I called her and said, "Hey, that company we've talked about, we need to start it tomorrow." And she was on tour, and so we did. And we did that event, which was incredible. It was for Scott Budnick, who was the creator of the Hangover trilogy. He had and has a nonprofit called Anti-Recidivism Coalition, which is super inspiring, but he for years has been going into prisons and just helping set up programs so that the inmates, once they're released don't fall right back into the same habits.
Yeah.
And so we went to Ironwood State Prison.
Did you do the TED Talk?
We did the TED Talk. We
Did
had
you
a
actually
small
do it?
team. Yeah.
Really? So
Yeah.
there's a TED
Yeah.
Talk out there of you?
Oh, did I speak? No, I didn't speak.
Oh, you
I did
produced
not.
it.
We produced it at the
Okay.
prison.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
And
you produced it for Branson. You weren't actually speaking in the TED Talk. Because I was like, if I
correct.
missed a
Yeah.
TED Talk of you talking, I'm absolutely going back and finding that shit.
No. I will send you there are recordings out there of the one that we did. Please don't judge us on the production value alone, but it was an incredible life-changing experience. I mean, we had a very small team that was allowed to actually enter into the prison, and the rest of our crew were all lifers that had been there. Some of them had been incarcerated since they were 16 years old, and they're there for life. And so we were hearing these stories while we were there building the event, and then we do it. There was about 300 people there, dignitaries from all over the world. The mayor of Oakland spoke, and it was just a super inspiring moment for me personally. I think for us as a company to start in that way, and it really just kind of jump-started everything. And at the time, I was still working at Golden Voice, and a few months later, we had kind of organically, just because of the years that I had worked all of these other festivals across the country and Meg's background and time in touring, we went from like zero to having a bunch of clients, from the artists that she had worked with over the years to the festivals that both of us had worked with. Because when the two of us met, she was at one of the first VIP festival and touring concierge companies in the country. And so she had that incredible background with her ability to manage artists, and it was really a great partnership. So fast forward a few months to June, and I sit down with the partners at Golden Voice, and I just said, "Look, I didn't mean to do this, but or I didn't plan on doing this, but here it is. And so what do we do here?" And they said, well, you can stay here and potentially make more money, or you can go and do your thing. And I think at that point I had kind of seen the light. And as much as I love and cherish my time at Golden Voice and all of those people, it was time to move on.
Yeah. So you have your own company now. Did you have like a golden era of this? Because it sounds like you guys started and just hit the ground running. So were those like first few years of that company just super exciting?
It was super exciting. We were traveling a lot. We were figuring things out. I mean, it obviously didn't come without challenges. And of course, running a business always has challenges, but it just organically grew just from word of mouth. And so I think some people maybe start a company and have trouble figuring out how to market it and how to get clients. And that wasn't necessarily the challenge for us.
What were your biggest challenges with the company?
I mean, the events themselves, a lot of what we were doing were festivals that were extremely logistically challenging. And so just figuring out how to get a large team to British Columbia to run operations for a festival nowhere near an airport on a 1-lane road. I mean, I think so much of it was about that for us. But the people that we had just met along the way were incredible. The people that I had met through Coachella and through doing these other events that we were able to bring with us and continue to bring with us to a lot of these events are just amazing. And so I think that's a part of it. And then the other part of it was just internally, how do we run a business? There's obviously things that cross over when you're in a lot of ways. I like to say that, I've created and launched dozens of brands because each festival is its own brand, kind of its own company, its own entity. And so that taught me over the years in a lot of ways how to run a business. I mean, you're running and managing a P&L. You're kind of dealing with the insurance and the legal aspects of it. And so I had, in many ways, I dropped out of high school pretty young and never went to college, but I think got my MBA in those years working with people like Bill, working in business management. And so a lot of it came naturally, but there were also just big learnings along the way. And
Did
I
you
think the
have
biggest challenge was people. People management was just the hardest one to figure out and to kind of nail the culture.
I was going to say that's, I think, most companies' biggest problem. People are assholes sometimes. Uh, would you, throughout this season, do you have like, was there a moment that you ever had that you were just like, man, we did it. Like we made it. Like we're there. Like we had like a mountaintop experience. Your company's doing incredibly well. You're producing a giant festival. Was there ever a moment where you're like, man, this is freaking incredible?
I think there were probably small moments along the way. I mean, I mentioned the festival in British Columbia, and that was just such an incredible place to be. And so being able to reflect on that with our team as we're standing up on a bluff or flying in a helicopter over these frozen lakes, that was an incredible event. But I think for me, it was probably doing Cal Jam, the first Cal Jam in 2017.
What about that experience was?
So that was the Foo Fighters festival that we co-created, and it was one of the first. I was a huge, Nirvana, as so many of us probably from our generation, was a huge inspiration to me. And then I became probably equally, if not even more, of a fan of the Foo Fighters. I think it was one of the first concerts that I ever went to when I was 13. First bigger concerts, maybe 12. And I'd had a moment a few years before we did Cal Jam with meeting Grohl for the first time at a DeAntwoord show at the Fonda downstairs. And I don't do this hardly ever, but I walked up to him and I was like, man, I have to tell you how much of a fan I am. And I told him about being there's a room in the Warfield in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So there's a room in the Warfield, and all of the artists that have played there pretty much ever have signed the wall in this room. And there was a big, like, protective square around this one, and it was Nirvana. And I told Grohl about that and about being in that room and how important that was to me to be able to see that. And I actually showed him a picture of the wall, and he like grabbed me and hugged me and embraced me. And he told me all about, that was actually when I guess Bill Graham had passed away. And so he was such an iconic person for the industry and for musicians, and that it was a very emotional show for them, and he remembered it. And so now fast forward to 2017, and we get a call to produce their festival, and I was just like,
yeah, dude,
I was floored. And so we did that, and it was just such an incredible experience. And that for me, I think, was really one of the first moments, was when I was like, holy shit.
Dude, that's incredible. So along with those mountaintop moments, did you have any moments where over the last, well, and I know that your business has transitioned, I think through the COVID years, maybe, is when you got out of doing more festivals to doing what you're doing now, correct? Is that?
Yeah, there's I think a lot of factors that go into that. I think just not only with COVID, but even before COVID, with kind of the saturation of festivals and how things were shifting within the industry, and it was really impacting budgets, and you were seeing a lot of festivals cancel. And then obviously going into COVID with just the cost of everything having an even larger impact on the state of the industry. So you're seeing talent costs go up exponentially, and then you're seeing infrastructure costs go up exponentially. And so it put a lot of festivals out of business, and a lot of other ones restructured, and ultimately a lot of our clients couldn't afford us anymore.
Yeah.
And so we had been doing brand work, and it just really kind of organically, because obviously brands activate at festivals, brands activate on tours. And so even early on in the years, we were doing some experiential work, and it's in some ways, I wouldn't say all of them, but in a lot of ways, it's much easier work. And certainly the timeline is condensed. So you could be planning a festival for 12 months and have X amount of budget, or you could be producing a brand activation for 2 months or even 4 weeks and have the same budget. And so just from a business standpoint, it made a lot more sense for us to be doing that work. And then also we had kids right before the pandemic, and I'm kind of thinking like, look, I don't want to be traveling all the time. I don't want to be standing in dirt fields. I don't have the energy to pull all-nighters for 4 days in a row. And so we really started to rethink our business strategy a little bit. And we worked with Louis Vuitton about 3 years ago, but I'd always felt like BWG didn't really resonate with brands in a lot of ways. You know, I would sit down and have a great meeting with Nike, and then at the end they'd say, okay, great, we'll call you when we want to produce a concert. And I'm like, oh wait, that's not all that we do. And so we created VEDA about 2.5 years ago, which really focuses on working with luxury brands and kind of elevated experiences. And it's been great.
Dude, that's awesome. Okay, so your journey is one that is inspiring to a guy like me, and one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation, because like we grew up in an era where I didn't finish college, right? I went through high school. I decided to skip college, move to LA, and just try to make my own way, right? And hope and pray that my work ethic would shine through and I would work my way up, and I did. I found myself in rooms that I never thought I would be in, around people that I'd never thought I would be around, just because I, had the work ethic and drive to get there. And you have always been very similar to that. Like you said it, you didn't graduate high school, then you didn't go to college, but the courage it takes to just, grab an email and be like, hey, I'm going to just email this guy and see if I can connect, and like to walk into a room and ask somebody for a job, and to, these are things that people, I think, these are attributes to people that I think are missing, maybe in generations behind us a little bit, the courage that it takes and the vulnerability to fail. Because like, we talk about the things that happened and worked, but for everything that worked, there was usually, 99 attempts that didn't, like
Yeah.
the times that we were trying to get jobs at other companies and things that we just completely failed and landed on our face and got up, but didn't stop us from sending that email. And it goes back to what you would have told your younger self is like, everything's going to be okay. And I think, from me sitting here looking at how your life has kind of transpired, it's like, yeah, dude, everything's been okay, dude. You've done a hell of a job, and had some pretty cool ass experiences along the way. So I commend you for that, man.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, dude. This was a fun conversation, and hopefully a conversation that we get to have again, and potentially dive into some of the more logistical festival stuff, because that's also a conversation that would be interesting to have. So I think down the road we may do that. But dude, thanks for jumping on with me, and yeah, dude, I hope all the success for VEDA you and your family in the future.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.